All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecil Chick, and I use female pronouns, she, her, and hers. Thank you so much for joining our second Titan Table Talk, brought to you by the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs in partnership with Alumni Engagement and Government External Relations. Today, our panelists will be engaging in a dialogue focused on LGBTQ+ history and civic engagement, social justice, and advocacy, and will be moderated by Dr. Jason Shepard, Professor and Department Chair of Communications here at Cal State Fullerton. Before we get started, I do want to let everyone know that there's been a slight change in plans in the advertisement for this event. We were originally going to have Kelsey Brewer here with us today. Unfortunately, due to a personal emergency, Kelsey will not be able to join as a panelist today. Before we get started with our program, I do want to provide some Zoom housekeeping information. So this is a Zoom webinar. All the attendees will be muted and there will be no access to camera. We will have a moderator that will lead us through the dialogue with our panelists today. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, or if you want to ask any follow-up questions of our panelists, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function located at the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. This dialogue will be recorded and posted with closed captioning on the Titan TV YouTube for everyone to enjoy. You'll be able to find it in the Titan Table Talks website. And at the end of this program, we'll provide a feedback form for folks who came in today to participate. It will be sent through the email that you use to register. Also, if you enjoyed today's dialogue, we will have the November Titan Table Talk on the 16th at 11:30 a.m. for Indigenous Heritage Month. And the topic will be on civic engagement in Native American and Indigenous communities. To kick off our event today, I would like to introduce the president of Cal State Fullerton, Fran Virjee, to provide some welcome remarks. Thank you, President Virjee, for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Cece. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Titan Table Talks, LGBTQ+ history of civic engagement, social justice, and advocacy. I love that title. Yes, we are honoring LGBTQ+ History Month a bit differently this year, but I want to be clear about something. Just because we evolved our cultural heritage months in an effort to tap into more impactful, speaker-oriented events doesn't negate the fact that this is still a celebration. This is very much a celebration of LGBTQ+ Titans, a celebration of LGBTQ+ communities, and of course, of LGBTQ history and the important role we play in it. Indeed, we Titans know how to do all that while celebrating, so we will be just fine. Case in point, a year ago, we became one of the first CSUs to raise a pride flag over our campus community. And yes, that made history, but raising that 12-foot pride flag to a sweet sound of I'm Coming Out by Diana Ross also made one heck of a celebration last year. And just as nobody these days can drink cranberry juice on a skateboard and ever not think about Fleetwood Mac, I will tell you to this day, I cannot walk past our campus flagpoles without thinking of Diana Ross and that beautiful pride flag flying over our campus. And in case you wondered, that same pride flag was raised over our campus again last week and is flying high today. And we at Cal State Fullerton continue to celebrate everything it represents and everything it stands for. As great as that is, and it is great, we are at a point in LGBTQ history that calls for more than just the power of a pride flag raising, more than just the power of LGBTQ history celebration. And yes, even more than the power of the legendary Diana Ross. It's a lot more than that. Because as happy as those things make us, as they make me, when it comes to LGBTQ+ history, I, like so many of you, remain frustrated, a bit worried, and even angry at times. Why? Well, because it seems like every single time we take a significant step forward in the fight for not just equality, but equity for our LGBTQ+ communities, whether it be marriage equality, military service equality, or even workplace equality, we get hit with the threat or the reality of those rights potentially being rolled back before our eyes. And our LGBTQ plus communities have more impediments intentionally placed in their path. And tragically, we lose more lives to anti-LGBTQ plus violence. Indeed, in recent years, we have seen and felt the travesty of those protections and rights for trans people rolled back in our schools, in our military, and even in our homeless shelters, underscoring the fact that our adversaries have no limit to both their lack of compassion and drive to rob folks of basic human rights. We've seen it in the White House as it takes steps to limit or undo LGBTQ rights when it comes to marriage equality and even healthcare. And now, even we have asylum and immigration policies that put queer and trans people in very serious danger. Many of you know the tragic story of Camila Diaz Cordova, who migrated from her native El Salvador, fearing for her life a few years ago. When she arrived in the United States and applied for asylum, she was denied and she was sent home, where she was tragically murdered, adding to the enormous death toll of transgender women killed, not just in El Salvador, but around the world. But as always, in this darkness, there is and there are rays of hope. Just a few months ago, the Supreme Court ruled that federal law protects LGBTQ workers from discrimination. I can't believe it's 2020 and we're just getting that ruling, but we did get it. And a few days ago, Pope Francis voiced his support for civil unions, for same-sex unions, which is transcendent as well. And a few minutes ago, I logged onto this Zoom to see some of the brightest lights, even to illuminate Cal State Fullerton and our LGBTQ plus communities. We've got Raymond Ortiz, so good to have him. We've got Gerrie Schipske and Jason Shepard. And of course, we've got all of you who are watching and are being a part of this program. Your presence gives me hope. Your advocacy pushes us forward. And your refusal to back down for LGBTQ rights shows that Cal State Fullerton is a preeminent force to be reckoned with in this fight. And we are not content with merely Orange County knowing that fact. We want the world to know that fact. The irony that we have to fight for the right to love each other is not lost on us, just as it was not lost on Harvey Milk, who famously said, "It takes no compromise to give people their rights. It takes no money to respect the individual. It takes no political deal to give people freedom. It takes no survey to remove repression." So folks, if it doesn't take loss, if it doesn't take compromise, if it doesn't take money, what does it take? What it does take simply to create a community where we don't just tolerate difference, but we celebrate difference, where we see that difference not as divisive or dilutive, but as enhancing and enchanting. From my perspective, what it takes is fairly simple. What it does take is readily achievable. What it takes is also the answer to so many other challenges that we have in this world today. It takes civic engagement. It takes the eradication of voter obstruction. It takes loud and proud LGBTQ voices and their allies' voices who will have the courage to share the lived experiences. And it takes rays of hope that remind us all that during the dark and difficult times, that we can and will illuminate the world with love. In other words, it takes a titan. It takes this election cycle. It takes all of us as the titans it will take to make this change, not just in our classrooms, but in our communities. Not just celebrating LGBTQ plus history, but making that history. And not just with words, but with our actions, with our votes. So I'm really, really excited to listen to this panel today. I'm excited to hear their views and to learn what they have to share. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for listening to our incredible program, participating in our program, and being Titan LGBTQ voices and advocates for change. Thanks so much.
Thank you, President Virjee, for your words. That will serve as a foundation for our dialogue today. Thank you so much for taking time and spending it with us this morning. To officially begin, I want to introduce our moderator. Dr. Jason Shepard is a professor and chair of the Department of Communications here at Cal State Fullerton, which is one of the largest journalism and mass communications program in the United States. Shepard's research examines the role of the First Amendment in American democracy, journalism, and culture. He has written and presented more than 100 articles and presentations about various aspects of communication law. Most recently, he published legal history research about the censorship of America's first LGBTQ magazine in the 1950s that led to the first gay rights case won before the US Supreme Court. At CSUF, Shepard teaches courses in communications law, history, and journalism. He serves as publisher of the Daily Titan student newspaper. He has won several university-wide leadership awards. Dr. Shepard has a PhD in mass communications with a PhD minor in law from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Prior to academia, Dr. Shepard served as a journalist for 10 years in Wisconsin, and he spent 3 years teaching middle school English and US history in the South Bronx of New York City as a courts member for Teach for America. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jason Shepard, everyone.
Well, thank you, Cecil, and thank you, President Virjee, for the introductions. It's an honor to be here today, and we've got two esteemed panelists who will engage in a discussion about some really critical and important topics and questions. Before I introduce the panelists, I just have a couple of minutes of remarks that maybe would frame some of our conversation, at least from a historical or through a historical lens. In 2019, reflecting on the 50th anniversary of the 1969 Stonewall riots that typically mark the birth of what we think of as the gay liberation movement, the gay conservative writer Andrew Sullivan noted that there has never been a better place or time in the history of the world to be gay than in 2019 and in the West. The remarkable gay revolution in media, business, politics, and law has ushered in an unprecedented era of equality for millions of LGBTQ Americans. Perhaps drawing on Martin Luther King's observation that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, Sullivan described recent LGBTQ history as, quote, the long night of persecution giving way to the dawning of integration, unquote. Lawyer and writer Walter Frank used similar language to describe the history of the American LGBT rights movement as having two phases. The first being a fight for freedom from oppression, and the second being a fight for full integration into society. Some of my recent historical research has examined the beginnings of the legal fight for LGBT rights in America, born out of cases involving the censorship of magazines in the 1950s, including a magazine called One Magazine that was published in Los Angeles, beginning in 1953, that is at the heart of my research. In the middle of the 20th century, the freedoms and liberties that gays and lesbians have at the beginning of the 21st century would have been impossible to predict or forecast. In the 1950s, homosexuals faced great risk in just seeking out others like them. The 1969 Stonewall riots, long identified as the spark that lit the liberation movement, was more than a decade away. One of my arguments in my research is that mass communication has played a critical role in advancing social justice for LGBTQ Americans, and the First Amendment, the rights to freedom of speech and press and protest, have been an essential tool. Communication has built queer culture and community and has been a tool to gain representation, tolerance, and equal rights in the broader society. Like the Black Civil Rights Movement and the Women's Liberation Movement, queer historian John D'Amelio has argued that the gay rights movement used many methods to, quote, emancipate themselves from the laws, the public policies, and the attitudes that have co-signed them to an inferior position in society, unquote. It was only 70 years ago when homosexuals were such a despised minority that mere communication among them was subject to punishment and suppression. In the 1950s and 60s, the government instituted a multifaceted approach to shut down communication networks for homosexuals, to suppress and punish them, They were a perceived threat to public morality. Laws prohibiting communication and expression were used as a weapon to stop social change, while challenges to those laws were tools to advance tolerance, liberty, and equality. As First Amendment law expanded during this period, LGBTQ citizens came out of the metaphorical closet and defined themselves as an insular minority group in America. Expanding ideas about the scope of the First Amendment provided additional legal tools for LGBT citizens during the homophile and gay liberation eras, including an access to public forums, freedom of association, and speech rights in the context of employment discrimination. First Amendment jurisprudence became a battleground over the right of homophiles to wear gender nonconforming clothes, perform in live theaters, advertise in the yellow pages of phone books, associate in and operate gay bars, form corporations, organize student groups, take out ads in student newspapers, and come out without being fired from their jobs. So the 50s and the 60s were a particularly repressive period in which government action gave rise to fledgling opposition movement among homosexuals who began to identify and organize. And it was through contesting the political and legal and cultural aspects, the so-called lavender scare of the 1950s, that homophiles began to develop notions of community and subculture that fueled the gay liberation era of the 70s and 80s, when activists fought for visibility and tolerance. The 1990s and 2000s gave rise to the gay rights era, characterized by growing acceptance and public opinion and by lawmakers. And the success of the gay rights movement suggests a break to the gay equality movement in the last generation. Many factors have contributed to the success of the LGBTQ movement, including the use of communications to connect individuals to a subculture. And the expansion of legal rights was also crucial. Most major political and moral issues in America eventually make their way to the courts and seek resolution as a matter of constitutional law. When it comes to LGBTQ rights, we can think about constitutional law as providing rights in 4 landmark cases in our lifetime. The first being Romer v. Evans in 1996, in which the Supreme Court overturned a Colorado state law prohibiting local governments from protecting LGBTQ citizens from discrimination. 2003, Lawrence versus Texas, the Supreme Court struck down Texas's so-called homosexual conduct law. Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015 legalized gay marriage, and most recently this summer, in Bostock v. Clayton County, the Supreme Court ruled that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects employees against discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The Supreme Court's decisions in Romer, Lawrence, Obergefell, and Bostock create the foundations of modern LGBT rights law. The strength of those foundations are not solid, or they should not be taken for granted. They will be tested in future court cases. These Supreme Court decisions were the result of years and years of work behind the scenes by activists, community groups, lawyers, scholars, average citizens fighting for tolerance and justice and equality. We've come a long way since the One magazine was published in Los Angeles in 1953, but the work of activists remain essential and important to the LGBT community today as ever before. So today I look forward to our discussion about where we've come and where we still have to go. So let me turn to introducing our panelists. I'll introduce each one, and then we'll jump in with some questions. I've got 4 or 5 questions to ask of them to have about a 30-minute conversation, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. Feel free to please put your questions in the Q&A chat, and I'll be able to see those, and we'll have kind of a structured but free-flowing discussion among our panelists. So our 2 panelists, I'm so excited to introduce both of them. First, let me tell you a little about Gerrie Schipske, healthcare staff attorney and advocate for the Community Legal Aid of Southern California. Gerrie is a skilled healthcare attorney and registered nurse practitioner with more than 25 years of experience in all aspects of healthcare law and policy. Currently, she represents a diverse range of clients on issues ranging from the eligibility to denial of benefits by Medicaid, Medicare, Covered California, healthcare service organizations, and insurance plans. She serves as legal aid liaison with the LGBTQ community on healthcare access issues. She previously represented major healthcare worker unions and healthcare corporations concerning contracting, benefit configuration, and legislative and regulatory compliance. She was honored by the Obama White House as one of 7 national champions of change for open government. She was appointed by President Clinton to the U.S. Attorney General's National Advisory Committee on Violence Against Women. She was the first lesbian elected to public office 3 times in the city of Long Beach. So welcome to Gerrie, and thank you for joining us. Our second panelist today, Raymond Ortiz. Raymond graduated from Cal State Fullerton with both a BA and MA in history. He graduated with his MA in 2015, at which time he specialized in gender and sexuality, queer studies, and women's and gender history. Upon graduation, he pursued a career in fundraising and development for nonprofit organizations, having worked as a community outreach coordinator for the LGBTQ Center of Orange County, an executive director at CCS Fundraising, and as the development operations manager at World of Children. Raymond currently works as the director, project development for Rely On Technologies, and is now serving in his 2nd year on the Cal State Fullerton Alumni Association Board of Directors. He identifies as part of the LGBTQ+ community and continues to volunteer on behalf of this populace. So welcome again, both Gerrie and Raymond. Let me start with a question, and Gerrie or Raymond, either one of you can feel free to jump in first. What issues do you think have been most impactful among LGBTQ communities in the past decade? And how does this history inform what issues impact LGBTQ communities now?
I would say, if I can jump in there, Raymond, is that visibility. I think visibility has been the biggest issue to impact our community. And I think it was Harvey Milk who said some time ago, that you need to come out to people. And I think that's probably the best political advice anybody could have ever given. Because when you come out, it is difficult for you to be the other. You now become the family member, the teacher, the nurse, the doctor, the person that someone has gotten to know and may have not known this aspect of your life. But once you come out, it is difficult for most others to focus on you and say, oh, well, that's the other, because they're like, well, I know this person, so that doesn't meet with the stereotype that I've heard. So I would say in the last 10 years, being visible, not only within your community and family, but also then being politically visible. There was a time, and it wasn't too long ago, that most politicians would never be seen next to a gay or lesbian person or a transgender person. And now they can't be seen without them because they understand the significance of our political power in the community and the widespread acceptance I think that we've received. Got a lot of way to go, but I am telling you, it is so much better than it was 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago.
To answer the question, I think that what's impacting us now is just how we go about politics and these civic issues in our community. It's about policy. It shouldn't be about politics. And unfortunately, that's not the case. We have umbrella politics where everything that you shared with us about the history of this community, with same-sex marriage, with trans rights, adoption rights, protection in the workplace, et cetera, it hasn't gone away. This isn't a vacuum where we can say, what happened in the past and we can celebrate that. And then what happens in the now, we're now fighting to protect everything that we won, that we fought for. We're still fighting the same battles. We're still fighting in the same liberation movement. It hasn't gone away. We're all in one big chapter of history, and it's the umbrella politics is the reason why we have to keep having the same arguments, the same conversations. We're now fighting to protect legislation that unfortunately isn't one and done and forever set in stone. That's the main conversation going on with the Supreme Court right now, where it's about putting people in place who, now that we have these protections, can we keep them? It's the same conversation, it's the same argument, it's just now adding on to that story. It's the same thing with umbrella politics. When you want to go into policies, one of the biggest issues, you know, that we have is there's a lot that goes on in the individual state versus federal law, where living in California, I can say that everything's great here, but I know it's not the same experience being carried out in all 49 states. And until we have that recognition at the federal level, it won't be the same experience in a lot of more conservative states. And even then, those wins that we do have at the federal level, they're not guaranteed. They haven't been. I feel like the past 4 years, it's been something that's been dangled over us the past few weeks. And it's the same conversation that we had 30, 40, 50 years ago.
In your personal and professional experiences, can you talk a little about how you've linked the idea of civic engagement to advocacy work?
Sure, I'll go on this one. Working in the nonprofit realm, I worked in fundraising, and when I was a consultant for CCS fundraising, I was assigned to work for the Catholic Church. So I was fundraising for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and I was born and raised in the Catholic Church. I'm openly gay. And while it was easier for me to maneuver it and to speak the language and to understand the culture where I was coming from, it's very much, I was one person that's against a very old institution, an institution that's so divided within itself. And not only that, but now my livelihood depends on raising this institution money. So where do I go from there? And I think part of, you know, when you are going to take on that responsibility, you need to understand your role and your audience. Don't come in thinking that, well, I'm here to make a change and make a difference. It's not going to happen overnight. And if you're looking to be in a room where it's more moderate liberal people, then are you really trying to make change, or are you looking for an audience of people who are just going to agree with you and smile and nod? Because that's not the case. This isn't a vacuum. It isn't going to be one and done. And that's, in my experience, it was, well, this is where I'm at. If I have a chance to make an impact with the messaging that I do, with the marketing, with the programs that I build out, then I'm going to take it one day at a time, but I'm going to be truthful to myself. I'm not coming to work, you know, with LGBTQ tattooed on my forehead, because I also know the audience that I'm working with. I want to present a conversation where I will be heard and not ignored, or at least seen for who I am. And for every pushback, you know, I worked with all 302 churches in the Archdiocese here in Southern California. So there was a full spectrum. There were many who very much took the institution to the literal sense of what the doctrine said. And then there's the whole other end where they say, hey, listen, like, we don't follow the broader institution. We've gone rogue. We have LGBTQ ministries. We welcome them in. And I was involved with it for 2 years. And there were many moments where I felt hopeless. And then there were many moments where I had colleagues, volunteers, people that never met me before, but they know that I was assigned to work with them on their project, who came out of the woodwork to say that they stood with me, that they have family, or they're like, just because we have spirituality doesn't mean that we're anti-LGBTQ. We very much support this way. And even up to a week ago, as I was, you know, collecting my thoughts, I thought to myself, with this answer, is this even worth sharing? Like, I'm one person in a broader institution, and sharing the story, you know, here on this panel, was it even worth it? And then we received the news about Pope Francis calling for same-sex civil union. So maybe me as a one individual on this, you know, planet of 6 billion, it perhaps isn't enough, but how many other Raymonds are there where ultimately you get all the Raymonds to have a voice? And it does force a hand. It does force, you know, the head of the institution, you know, to call for change. And that's why I think of like going back to the Supreme Court and everything going on. I don't accept, you know, to say, well, these are my Catholic views, you know, I'm just following the religion. You can't hide behind that anymore, because if the head of it can change and evolve, you know, it's about that presence, and it's about not backing down.
Well, and
Gerrie, some of your thoughts.
Well, I'm very fortunate to work for an organization, Community Legal Aid, that I hope you all get to know about. It provides free legal services throughout Orange County and part of Los Angeles. And my particular unit I'm in is in healthcare. So what I've been seeing over a period of since I've been there is the systemic discrimination against particularly transgender clients who happen to have Cal Optima, which is the Medi-Cal program for Orange County. But we see systemic problems throughout healthcare that is just not gender related. It is a system that is not set up to be as friendly and as helpful as it needs to be, because the basis of healthcare is the basis of democracy. I'm so glad that Vice President Biden is bringing this to the forefront. We're in the middle of a pandemic, everybody knows that, but more importantly, if you do not have access to healthcare, you can't go to school, you can't work, you can't become civically involved. And so it's extremely important that we as a society make sure that we have that for everyone, not just for those who can afford it. I will tell you that it is so refreshing to be in an organization like Community Legal Aid, where diversity is welcomed, it's encouraged, and it is our clientele. I was elected to public office in Long Beach, and I was elected 3 times. And what I found is that, and I'm with a partner, I've been with a partner, we've got married, we've been together 40 years. We raised 3 foster children that became adopted children. And so we went through many of the struggles that we are continuing to hear others go through even currently. But what I will tell you is that my experience has been is that people more and more, again, I get back to that earlier comment about the importance of coming out, so that people get to know you and get to know you as part of a community they may not know otherwise. And I will tell you that I do feel that those of us who've been in political office have had to serve as role models, not just for other members in our community, but we were looked at and viewed, and I'm still politically active as well. And I'm looked at, you know, and they go, oh, I know her. She's ethical. She has strong integrity. She's a fierce advocate for the people that, you know, she works on behalf of. And that is so important, I think, for the credibility of our community and for moving forward, even with the sad things and tragic things we are hearing on the political front regarding the Supreme Court and regarding this current administration. I think good people really do prevail. It takes a while, and it takes a lot of, it saps our energy. But I'm just here to tell you, having seen this over a period of time, I do believe that the system will work and that we need to be as visible and be a participant as best as we can in the system, so that people look at us and say, wow, I want to get to know more people like this person. And I think we're seeing that has changed tremendously. I know the frustration, Raymond, you know, I taught at Cal State Long Beach for 11 years, and I taught women's studies, political science, and whatever. And I saw a change on campus, particularly about acceptance and diversity. And I do believe that it's reflective of the larger community. But I do also see that we have a systemic problem with economic discrimination, and that whole issue of, we had a discussion the other day at Community Legal Aid about diversity and racism. And I also brought up that we need to talk about the intersectionality of how things also cut across class and gender as well as race. And that I'm just hoping that we don't segment our focus and advocacy in a particular area, not understanding that it so cuts across these other three areas, and that we need to work, those of us who are activists in any of this have to be activists in all of it.
You both have touched on the political aspects of the work that we do. The next question, what do you wish both the Republican Party and Democratic Party knew about the LGBT communities and civic engagement?
Well, I do think they both know. I think the Democratic Party, I used to be the executive director of the Democratic Party in Orange County as we turned the county blue. And I just have to tell you that, that we have long known in the Democratic Party the importance of the LGBTQ community and how they have been such great contributors, not only financially, but they are the workhorses. We are the workhorses of the Democratic Party. The Republicans, not so much. And the Republicans, I just shudder when I look at, Facebook and see log cabin Republicans, all 50 of them, come out, in favor of Trump, because I really worry about this self-loathing that would be going on with somebody who would even think for a moment that the Republican Party that is currently configured welcomes us. It doesn't. It doesn't. And I have to tell you, in old days, it did. It did. But unfortunately, it did as long as people were closeted. There was never, I think, a wholesale acceptance of our community by the Republican Party if you were out and you were proud. If you were not out and you were moderate, you were okay. And the Republicans, welcomed whatever money that you wanted to give and whatever effort you wanted to give. But I think we are going to have to see a total reconstruction of the Republican Party before we see them even coming close to accepting the diversity that's so needed in both parties.
I agree. And to add to that, I think this is where I switch to my history major role, where I look at both parties. And I would say the first thing you should do is open a history book, because at the end of the day, this country was founded, and I use that term loosely, but it was founded on separation of church and state. Right. And so when you bring in faith of any religious institution or belief system out there, you're impressing upon your views. And that goes for both sides. If you're someone who's very liberal to the left, that in itself is a view that impacts, everybody. So you have to be cautious with that. I think for the Republican side, I want to be cautious of that, because we have Republicans, we have moderate Republicans, and then we have those who support Donald Trump. And I think that a lot of the issue there is the use of religion as like the wall you're going to hide behind, the shield, when in reality, trying to say what's the norm, trying to decide what's the norm, because when you try to figure out what the norm is, then you create the other, and the LGBTQIA community ends up being the other. And the reality is this land doesn't belong to any of us. The indigenous people of America were massacred and pushed off their land by settlers who came over here. So there is no original people here who end up being like white, heteronormative, Christian beliefs. That's not the norm. There is no standard. This is a melting pot that unfortunately right now isn't working. So to say that, well, my belief is that, there's no room for that, because that's not what this country was founded on. And for the Democrat side, I think it's about being cautious with your messaging, because there's moments where it goes back to the issue with umbrella politics, where if you check one, then you're going to have to check all these. But I think a lot of the issue is often I feel like I'm being used in the middle of a tug of war, and whichever side I land on, I have to embrace everything, because there is no room for just straight policies. You have to check a box. If you don't register a certain way, you're not going to get certain information. And there are like people who have faith, people who have Christianity, people who have any form of spirituality, who are also pro-gay rights. But where is the room for that? And you have people who identify as LGBTQ, who are, are very liberal, perhaps are fiscally conservative. There's no room for that anymore. It's very tribal, and we don't even have the room for third-party candidates, really. But there's no conversation. It all boils down to a two-party system. So I think with Democrats, you have to be cautious of your messaging, and you're taking on a mantle of a lot of people. And because right now, in this moment in history, you are the party that has fully embraced moving forward the LGBTQ rights and agenda, you have to take that responsibility. This isn't just about, trying to make that part of a broader agenda. And that's part of the argument that I have with the other side is, you're still fighting, like when you're fighting for, the way I describe it is, you're fighting for 4, 5, and 6. I'm still trying to get 1, 2, and 3. Now, it's not my fault that you see your 4, 5, and 6 as 1, 2, and 3. That's not the case. So let's all take a moment to realize that I don't have, not only as someone who's gay, but also as a Hispanic in this country, I don't have the same equity that a lot of other people do. So if you don't believe in gay marriage, then don't get gay married. I don't know what to tell you, but that doesn't mean, someone across the country in a random state that will never meet me in my lifetime, you shouldn't be losing sleep because I decide I want to, have a certain right and act on that right on the opposite end in the West Coast.
Well, I think one of the most tragic things that has happened in this political environment is the good people in the Republican Party haven't spoken out against the evil and the viciousness and the intent to harm and deprive people of their right to pursue happiness and liberty, and for them to be quiet and not to say anything. I think that's the largest tragedy, and I'm hopeful, depending on the outcome of the election, the dust is gonna clear eventually. And I think we as a population need to re-examine exactly what Raymond was saying about the Democrats, and actually, hopefully, the good people in the Republican Party will say, we're not going to tolerate what we allowed to happen for these 4 years, because it's been so destructive, not only to their party, it's been destructive to this country. And I think what it's done is, for the other political party, the Democrats, it's forced kind of a discussion in the extreme when we have more in common than the both ends of the political spectrum. And I think that's what we have to repair. And I think our community has an opportunity to speak out, and wherever we see injustice, not just in our own community, but for other communities, it's so important that we speak out on that.
Well, Gerrie, you've led us right into a great segue into the next question, which is, what do you wish members of the LGBTQ community knew about the need for them to vote and to become politically engaged in the elections and beyond?
Oh, as somebody's been politically active all my life, I just shudder when I hear people say, well, I don't know. I don't know if it counts. Or right now we're hearing that there's still undecideds. It is beyond comprehension. But saying that, we look at what the early turnout is right now across the United States, and it is phenomenal. And if we keep this up, particularly we're seeing a really good surge in votes among young people. And I think that is so, so important. You are the ones that are setting the course of the future. And while my vote is important, yours is so important, because it's the beginning of, I think, of a turnaround in the political system that, with the numbers that you present, can make incredible differences. So I know, you look at if you look at social media and if you pay attention to anything on TV, you go, oh God, is this really going to matter? It does matter. It really does matter, because every single vote, we have stories where remember the last 2016, the win for the president in the Electoral College, which is a whole other discussion area, was minuscule in only 3 states, which meant if you broke it down by precinct, it was like 5 votes per precinct that won him the presidency. So yes, it does count. I wish it wasn't so close, and I don't quite understand why it's so close in many places, but the importance is do whatever you can to be civically active, and the minimum is vote. It just absolutely, there should be no excuse for people not voting.
To add on to that, I would say that for our own community, be aware of the divisions that we have internally. There's a lot of discrimination within the LGBTQIA community, especially with the trans community. There's a lot of experiences that aren't commonly shared and understood experiences. But nonetheless, while the L, the G, the B, the T, the Q, the I, the A, while those are separate communities right there, and the reality is I don't, my experience is my own. I don't understand a lot of perhaps another gay man, a lesbian woman, etc. But mine are my own. But because of those who are in power for many generations, those who do have a seat at the table, we've all been painted in the same corner. And we've all been lumped together as LGBTQIA. So we're now one acronym. And we are stronger in numbers. And we need to remember that and keep that in mind, that we need to work together. And while there are certain things or certain fights and certain conversations that perhaps don't apply to us, it very much does. Because all we're going to do is weaken our own cause and our own movement, and nothing's going to get done. Not only within our own community, but there's a lot that we have to address in our own backyard with cultural acceptances of someone who identifies within the community, which could also cause division. It's one thing to be a gay man who's Hispanic versus a gay man who's white versus, et cetera. And that intersectionality we have to be aware of, and ultimately we need to support one another, because whether we like it or not, for lack of better words, we've all been painted into the same corner, and we need to support each other and be just as woke about our own causes that our brothers and sisters are having, so that we can unite and become this, power that will continue to have a seat at the table.
And Raymond, that's so important, because what I think the Republicans and those who would like not to see us be powerful view, and they don't quite understand the term, but it's horizontal hostility. When we as a group feel we don't really have power, or the power that we want, we often take it out against each other. And the most powerful message I think we can send from our own community is if we can link with other communities, because if we get together, they can't stop this. And that's what they're counting on. They're counting on the divisiveness. They're counting on, Jason, I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems to me in the last 2 weeks on Facebook, I have never seen so many trolls in my life coming out with constant negative message. I always acknowledge them and say, you're a good troll, now go collect your Russian rubles. But that to me is the message that's being driven, is if we can divide people, if we can make them question their institutions, the commonality that we have, the connection we have with our institutions, then we will not get what we need, and we will not have the power that we need to take back. And so I would hope that would be another lesson from this entire campaign, is that we need to reach out to our brothers and sisters in all communities and say, what's in common and how can we work together? Because if we don't, we're going to continue to be siloed, and we're going to continue to do this internal hostility because we feel, we can't reach up and get what we need from the bigger power structure.
So we've just got one more formal question. I'd like to invite the audience once again to put questions into the Q&A chat feature, and we'll get to those momentarily. and we can go in lots of different directions as we wrap up the discussion in the next 15 or so minutes. But the last kind of formal question I've got, from your personal and professional experiences, what advice would you give to individuals who wish to leverage civic engagement to support LGBTQ rights?
Well, I was just say one of the things I'd like to see in Orange County is really strengthening the LGBTQ Center. It's a resource, but I think it could be so much more powerful in the community. On, you know, Cal State Fullerton, UCI, you know, they have programs where they're trying to reach out to our community, but I think we need to build it. And we need to focus internally as a community and say, how can we do our own community building? We're often very busy helping other communities build. The political party structure, maybe our favorite candidate or our favorite organization. But I do think we as a community need to expand the outreach of the center and the programs that are available, and make connections with university to see how, in fact, we can reach the academic community so that can push our advocacy forward.
The advice that I would give is more so specifically to people out there who identify as heterosexual or who are not people of color. If you are going to take up the mantle of joining us and being an ally and fighting the good fight, take the time to educate yourself. And because a lot of the conversations begin at home in your own backyard with your own family, your own friends. Everybody has that one uncle or aunt who has the Trump flag, but yet they say that, oh, I support you, I'll be at your wedding, blah, blah. It's like, but your vote kind of working against that. But I would say, again, my advice is to don't let your own privilege blind you. I'd like to think that sometimes when you are someone who is straight or not a person of color, you can be overtly, I think I cautiously say overtly woke, where, you know, you're there fighting the good fight and you want to join the revolution, but in the process, you are working very hard to find like the best candidate. If you're so far to the left, you want to get it moving forward. And in the meantime, you're ripping apart candidates of people of color, of people who identify as LGBTQIA, because they don't check every box. They're just as bad, or they're just as bad as the broader institution that, you know, that they're campaigning on behalf of. And as a result, you know, you're against the system as a whole. And so you end up voting, I don't know, third party in a two-party system, or it's not constructive. You know, that's great that perhaps you're so far ahead because you've been able to open up a history book and see candidates that look like you who have already made it that far. So you're able to look past certain representations that perhaps don't impact you the same way. Meanwhile, I'm like, hey, like, I'm still celebrating that Mayor Pete was able to get that far. Like, as a gay person, that's huge. Like, was he on paper my pick? Not really, but I'm not gonna like rip him to shreds. I applaud him for daring to compete and be able to make it that far. You know, I think of someone like Kamala Harris, who I adore, but I can understand why, you know, people don't say she's not the most far left. And to me, I'm like, let's not take away from this moment, because there's a lot of communities out there who are celebrating that a woman of color is there, daring to compete on our behalf, and not only has, you know, a great voice, a great representation, and is very much owning everything along the way, but is taking a lot of the brunt and the bullets and actually has a fighting chance. So we're still trying to get a seat at the table, whether we're people of color or someone who or identifies as LGBTQIA. Don't negate that. You're taking for granted. And if you're voting third party or not voting at all or ripping it apart, you know, often I'll hear responses, well, it's California, it doesn't matter because it was going to turn blue anyways. That sentence right there is in itself a state, is in itself a privilege. The fact that you can say, well, it doesn't matter, California's been a term, but it doesn't matter if I voted for Jill Stein or whoever, like, it's fine. And to me, my response is, it must be nice. It must be nice that you can do that, that you feel so comfortable and you just exploited your own privilege to put down, you know, my little flag that I'm like, it's just exciting to see a candidate up there who's gay or who has, you know, who looks like me, who I feel like is speaking on my behalf, like not me and my kid, but me as an individual, where I finally feel seen and heard, and there's actual chance, perhaps I'll be able to see that in my lifetime. And when you shut that down because you want to get the red pen and go through every single thing in their resume, well, then you're just very much part of the problem. It's, you know, whether you're left or you're right, or, you know, you're red versus blue, at the end of the day, it's all white, straight people talking to each other and fighting on my behalf or fighting against me. And like, whether you're fighting for me or against me, how about you let me do my own fighting and give me the chance to fight equally?
I mean, if I can step on that a little bit and add to it about the privilege issue, you know, many college students have the privilege of being on their parents' healthcare policy until they're 26. And I ask all of you, take a moment and really find out about the Affordable Care Act. You know, unfortunately, in political debates, you only get snippets. But I'm telling you, folks, that it is the most revolutionary change in access to healthcare since Medicare. It opened up the door for people to get healthcare coverage where they would have not had any. It removed pre-existing conditions, and don't listen to Trump. They're in court right now, in the Supreme Court, and they want to remove everything out of the Affordable Care Act because it's also called Obamacare. But it has a minimum level of benefits that insurance companies weren't required to give. Preventive care is free under your health plan because of the Affordable Care Act. It has other parts too. It has, you know, nursing training and healthcare allied professional scholarships and training. It really focused in on waste and abuse in the healthcare system. We don't hear this, but we kind of think sometimes, well, I have mine, it's no big deal. And, you know, so what if they go ahead and change it and things. I ask you, when you hear these issues, if you take a step forward and just look into them and find out, oh, that's what they mean. And talk to people who haven't had health care coverage until they got this under the Affordable Care Act, because if they are able to dismantle it without a reasonable replacement, we will see millions and millions of people without any health care, or those who have been exposed to COVID or have any kind of pre-existing condition. They will not be able to get health care. And quickly on that, women, you need to understand that being a woman was a pre-existing condition because it meant you could get pregnant. And so most health plans did not have to cover maternity coverage unless your group employer paid that extra amount to have maternity coverage. So this is not just a matter of, oh gosh, you know, it's a bunch of poor people getting health care. It's not. These are working people who, if they didn't have access to the Affordable Care Act through Covered California in California, they would have nothing. And the majority of bankruptcies in this country have been caused by healthcare bills. So healthcare, and I have a bias because that's the unit I work in at Community Legal Aid. We see this all the time. We see people who've had difficulties that are just devastated financially because for some reason they didn't get into healthcare coverage. And now they're having to pay back to the Hoag Hospital and other places a tremendous bill. So please, that's the privilege I think too we need to examine. We have it doesn't mean that everybody has it or everybody can get these things, these benefits. And what can we do as a community to make certain that it's just not about us, it's about everybody. The pie is big enough for everybody to have a piece of it.
So thank you. And questions are starting to come in. There are two healthcare or health related questions. So I'm going to maybe, Gerrie, throw these at you and do both of them together, or you know, one at a time, but group them around healthcare. One question, Gerrie. I have a friend who wants to transition and start HRT, but they're afraid that Medicaid will no longer cover hormones. Many of my friends who have transitioned have expressed their fear that they might lose access to their hormones as well. Gerrie, do you foresee this being the case? If so, how likely?
No, I've had quite a few clients who I've helped with the hormone issue. No, you're under state law. We're very fortunate in California. Under state law, this is part of the gender affirming healthcare treatment that is to be available by all healthcare plans, public and private. So if you have difficulties, please call Community Legal Aid, and I'll put my phone number on here. You can call me directly, and I can work with you and your health plan to get it. Oh no, I have several clients right now. We're fighting about facial feminization surgery, which we've gotten approved, electrolysis for removal of hair. I mean, all the things that are necessary for someone who's making a transition are legally required under state law, not federal law, but state law. And let me just give you a little explanation about Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal federally is called Medicaid. It is a federal program, but it is also jointly funded by the state. And the states are allowed to make rules regarding access to that care. And in California, the rules were made very clear that the plan cannot discriminate on someone who is transitioning. And so it's please call us. I'll leave the phone number, but absolutely, you are entitled. If you have Medi-Cal, Medicaid coverage, that is a covered benefit.
And there's another question about donating blood. And the question is, with regard to healthcare, there's still the stipulation that men who have had sex with another man within 3 months are not allowed to donate blood. Is there any steps on changing or addressing that via legislation?
Well, you know, blood donation comes as a function of shortage. When things are short, they don't have enough blood, the rules get changed. Right now that there is adequate donation. And so I think that's where the obstacle lies too. It would have to take state law to allow this because the medical organizations have to ensure that, you know, that the blood supply is free from, and that includes not just in this situation, but persons who've been exposed to someone with hepatitis, which is a big problem, more so of a problem I would suggest than HIV. But it, you know, again, this is something I would contact your legislator. And if you think that this is something that he or she might want to support, they can put in guidelines so that there's some flexibility. I think sometimes hospitals, blood banks, particularly look at this as a hard, fast rule, and they say, nope, and they exclude a group. So I think working with them about getting some flexibility in the regulations would open up. And I thank you for wanting to donate blood because particular platelets are in great need.
Shifting gears a little, both Raymond and Gerrie, what are your thoughts on just a general question from somebody? What do you advise about coming out at work?
I mean, first and foremost, you should always be your whole self, your authentic self. It just depends on your style and preference. I'm very much me. I'm reserved with who I am, and that's just my style in general. But I mean, you very much should be your whole self. I mean, I think if the situation calls for it, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't. And if there are issues, and that's the problem for the institution that you have. Like I said before, I worked in environments where it wasn't encouraged, and I had situations where internally some of my leadership, it wasn't until an instance happened, maybe after about 2 years being there, where it was basically, you should just address your sexuality in strides if people ask it, and keep it, you know, open-ended. And at that point, based on who I am and my nature, it was just, no, I'm not doing that. I think a big issue with our culture is people don't like the word no. People don't like the word no in any shape or form, or no, I don't agree, I disagree with you, here's why I think that's not the best idea. Like any shape or form of the word no, it well, what do you mean now? What do you mean you're not going to comply? It's like, well, what do you mean you're asking me to cover up who I am when I wasn't the one that brought the conversation up to begin with? You know, I'm just Raymond as far as I'm concerned. My sexuality, it's a part of me, but it doesn't define me. It's one of many things about me. And if you're leading into assumptions because of mannerisms, because of how I carry myself, etc., that's on you. What does that have to do with the work that I'm doing? And if you have an issue with me, well, that's your issue, but I'm not going to go back in the closet for anybody. I'm here to do a job. You're paying me to do a job, and I've done the job, and I've done it pretty well. So if you end up losing me in the process, you're bad, but ultimately it's going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt me, because you have no grounded case at all against that, because you just don't agree, or you don't like it, or it makes you uncomfortable. Then that's a you issue. It's not a Raymond issue.
Well, the economic reality depends on, I have to say, I mean, it depends on where you work. The issue is, in California, it is illegal to discriminate against somebody because of their status, their gender status. The reality, as I have told people and told students in, you know, healthcare HR classes, is, yeah, you know, it is illegal, but you have to gauge where you're working to decide if it's a matter of comfort, if they can retaliate against you and let you go for another reason, and you can try to sue. But it's a social situation that you're working in, and I think you're the best guide to decide how much you want to disclose of yourself. And that's not just about sexual orientation. That can be about a lot of things. I would be more fearful telling people in some settings I was a Democrat than I was a lesbian. You know, so it all depends. But, you know, just know in California you have the law on your side. That's not the case in other states. And that's not the case with all employers. It's not the federal law. So I would say use your gut instinct. And if you feel comfortable doing that, then do it. If you don't, there's no requirement that you come out. And by the way, I want to give you a little secret. Most of the time they already know. Most of the time when we think that, you know, oh my God, you know, what if they find out? Well, they know. They know. It's very difficult to disguise pronouns of people that you've been with, and where you've traveled and visited, and your interactions, your social interactions with people. They know. So it's up to you, and it should never be a requirement of employment that you have to disclose. That's the other thing you need to know. They have no right. They have no right to ask you.
Another question that came up, do you have any opinions on how research is conducted? Are any aspects hurtful to the LGBT community? So I'm not exactly sure which angle this question is looking at, but do either of you have any thoughts on potential implications of research as being potentially hurtful to our community?
Yeah, particularly in women's healthcare, lesbians are often kept out of research studies. And partially that is because, I don't think purposely, it's because we are still invisible to many healthcare providers. And so there is not the screening and the questioning about healthcare issues related to lesbians that there are for heterosexual women or women who are actively heterosexual. You know, so that I would think is the biggest drawback, is that if we are not visible, and this is one of the issues that Community Legal Aid is trying to take on in Orange County, we need to be visible in healthcare. We need to be part, when you go on a website, you should see something affirming and welcoming for all communities, not just the assumed, you know, white, straight person who's gone online to look for healthcare. Some of the health plans have that, some of them don't. It's very clear that their message is not welcoming. So I would say is the omission out of the research rather than anything affirmatively negative against us.
I agree. I think for me, as in my own learning and just going through the dailies of life, there wasn't a lot that I probably knew that I was counted for until it was taken away. And then I was like, oh, I didn't realize that this whole time I was being counted when I was able to check off that box, and all of a sudden that box isn't there. And a lot of that realization came about in the past 4 years under this current administration, where within 24 hours of taking the oath of office, President Trump, first and foremost, he removed all mentions of LGBTQ issues from the White House website. And then they removed the blurb on there about how John Kerry made a statement of, apologizing for the lavender scare. That was removed. And then there was where President Trump signed an executive order to remove identifying or bisexual preference, et cetera, from the 2020 census. So it's what's scarier than like efforts to be anti-LGBTQ is the efforts to just completely erase. Right. And, I think something that both Gerrie and I keep referencing in all the answers to these questions is that we keep saying in this state, in this state, in this state. We are in California, where it's basically, we live in Disneyland compared to the rest of the US. Absolutely. So if kind of going back to a previous question about how you can get involved, what you can do, or how you can educate yourself, or if you're concerned about hormone therapy, et cetera, keep in mind that this is in California. If you want to get involved and be active, see what you can do to, even from here, help support some of the other states out there supporting the causes, because whatever is being removed here in California isn't as bad as some of what's going on in some of the other states. And if you can find a way to get involved, one website I reference would be like the Crooked Media franchise right now to help with with the campaigning going on. They have them adopt a state program where if you already know that your state's pretty liberal, but you want to still help further causes and agendas, you can get involved with organizations in other states by phone, by Zooming, by emails, where you can help those causes along. And whatever's happening here, whatever sense of data is being erased or improperly collected, be mindful that it's happening across the country, and just to stay active. Read the news when you read things like, oh, he's changing the census. And I'm thinking, was that ever a question before? I guess it was. I don't really know. Because at the end of the day, whether you're gay or straight, however you identify, we're all in life. I'm reading the news while scrolling on my phone. And I think it's important to just take the time and learn about the census in general. What does that even do? I think, learn what the word like gerrymandering means. We hear these terms all the time, but I don't think most people really know what they mean. Educate yourself on how our system works and the impact of the census and why it is headline news that they're just removing us from a website, removing us from a checkbox. Like it is huge.
Lambda Legal Defense is a wonderful national organization I really encourage you to look into, because they're taking on, through litigation, the defense of people in all these other states. And they were really instrumental in many of the landmark cases that were decided on behalf of our community. So check them out. They will tell you what's happening nationally.
Well, both of your answers are a good segue into maybe what will be our last question from the audience, and then we'll welcome back Cecil to wrap up the event for the day. But the last question is, what are some ways allies can get involved both politically and in the community to help advocate and support the LGBTQ plus community, including potential resources and websites? So ways that allies can support.
Well, stepping up and calling out when things are said that are not right. Being there as, it's one thing for us to do it, and people are, oh yeah, because you're gay and you're sensitive about that. But when our allies step up for us, that is really significant. That's very important. And conversely, when we step up for our allies, we need to hear more from our community about what is going on with Black Lives Matter, with the whole system of, the economic insecurity that people are facing. I have to tell you folks, when they lift the eviction moratorium in a couple of months, we are going to have a tsunami of people evicted in Orange County. I don't know specifically because we're trying to focus getting ready on that, but nationally. And we need to step up and speak out. If we have housing and we're not housing insecure, we need to step up for those who are, and call upon our elected officials and others to help with this situation, because it is going to be unlike anything I think any of us have seen in our lifetime to have all these people without access to shelter. So I think coordinating with our allies, stepping up for them when we can, and asking them to step up for us when they see something that's not right that's being said or done about us.
Some resources that I recommend that are publicly out there, the Human Rights Campaign is a great website to find information as well of current issues, as well as a good history timeline of, how we've come this far. That's a great one. The National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce is another great resource to learn about what's happening at the federal level and what's going on in our country, across the country. I think it's important, like I always said from the beginning, is to open a history book and take the time to learn about these issues. And it may sound like common sense, but it's not when they don't directly pertain to you. And you could be someone who's very, very woke, very involved, but I don't think that perhaps the Supreme Court hearing for Amy Coney Barrett is affecting you if you're straight, perhaps the same way that I'm taking it or reading into it. I think it's important to understand and to really do understand the institutions that affect you. There's nature versus nurture. And I think of someone like Judge Barrett, who's up there saying that my beliefs don't impact my rulings, and research. Look at her background, look at the case hearings, understand her platform, because I do agree that it's not the faith that impacts, especially when you have a pope who's now calling for a same-sex civil union. What it is, because I do think there is room for like spirituality, and there is a lot more across the aisle that we could have, but it's not. So I do agree it's not about, in using her as an example of Catholicism, it's about your interpretation of it and how you're using it to impact your work. And even that's with anybody with human nature. You're shaped by your own views, and there's paper trails out there where you can look at a politician or a influential figure's history and track record, and you can tell that story. So take the time to research, take the time to research these causes that perhaps don't directly affect you, but they do. Because at the end of the day, if you want full democracy, that's the definition of it.
And if you want to learn more about the LGBTQ community, Raymond, I like what you're saying about, do some research, open a history book. The One archives at UCLA are excellent, and they're open to the public. And June Mazer lesbian archives are also available. And I think just going through even the newsletters of the different organizations, and you see it is so different now, but we are at risk of losing that. And I think if people have a sense of how hard fought it has been to get where we are now, I think that you might have a different perspective on why it's important to become civically active and involved, because we're at danger. All of us are in danger, no matter what community you're in. If we're not in the community of interests that are going to be politically empowered if they win, then we're all in danger of losing some very, very important rights, and we need to be out there fighting for it.
Well, Gerrie and Raymond, I want to thank you very much for your thoughtful remarks. There have been inspirational comments. There's been thoughts that make us nervous and worried. You are role models for people in the community that are doing such important work, serving as advocates, living visibly, living out loud, practicing what you preach. So I just want to thank you for participating and being so thoughtful today. And let me turn this over to Cecil to bring some conclusion to the event.
Hi, Jason. Can you wrap up for Cecil?
Oh, sure. Let me see if we had anything else. Yes, I will just thank both Raymond and Gerrie again, and on behalf of Kelsey, who wasn't able to join us today, thank her for participation. Thank you to HRDI for organizing this event, for President Virjee's thoughtful remarks at the beginning, and please look forward to the